立法會主席。
The President.
請各位繼續站立。行政
Members will please remain standing while the Chief Executive enters the chamber. The Chief Executive. Please keep quiet, members. Mr. Albert Chen, return to your seat straight away. Will members please keep quiet? If members are yelling like this, I'll have to order you out of the chamber. The Chief Executive will first address the Council. Chief Executive. President, honorable members, fellow citizens. After 2 months, I am so pleased to come down here to make a speech in the Council and then answer members' questions. In the new term, our team is working in full cooperation. Over the past 12 months, I've implemented some of the ideas in the manifesto. We have achieved some stages of achievements and progress. For the rest of the ideas, they will be activated in the coming 4 years. Housing is one of the top concerns of the public. The administration has curbed the soaring trend of the property prices. We have increased the short-term, medium-term, and long-term housing supply. We have planned to build 79,000 PRH units within 5 years from 2012 to 13, and 17,000 HOS units within 4 years from 2016 to 17. We announced the findings of the NENT, New Development Areas Planning and Engineering Studies. These represent a milestone for the new generation, new towns. We are concerned about the shortage of business and commercial land and the high prices. The SAR government has forsaken short-term thinking. We are making preparation for the needs of the next 20, 30 years. Today, a 20-year-old may have his family in 10 years' time. His accommodation may mainly come from the Northeast NT. A junior secondary student today may see his home in the NT Northeast in 20 years' time. The kindergarten kids today may be living in new reclamation areas in 30 years' time. It is the target of this term of administration to push for land supply for the medium and long term. The SL government will take advantage of economic growth to ease and resolve long-existing livelihood issues, including poverty, aging population, and environmental protection. The global economy is in a state of flux. On the whole, Hong Kong's economy is relatively stable. The European and US experience shows that we cannot take economic stability for granted. We have to collectively preserve Hong Kong's economy. We have to take advantage of the business opportunities. If the economy gets into trouble, livelihood will go with it. The SAR government is alive to the opportunities for economic development in the mainland and overseas. Over the past year, I've visited Beijing, Shanghai, Tianjin, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen to boost cooperation. In April, I met with the NDRC Director and Minister of Commerce and achieved some consensus. First of all, the SAR government will tie in with the midterm review of the 12th five-year plan in order to facilitate better implementation in the coming 2 years. Second, the NDRC agreed with the SAR government's involvement in the advance work of the 13th five-year plan in order to make sure they will be more in line with Hong Kong's needs. Third, in 2014, there will be implementation of liberalization of trade in services in Guangdong. Fourth, the early and pilot implementation policy in Guangdong will be extended to the 9 provinces in the Pan-PRD area. In the past year, I've met with 17 leaders from 17 provinces, cities, and municipalities to develop business opportunity. We'll go on with the G2G work. In the next half of this year, I'll be leading a delegation of business and professional representatives at the visit Guangxi and Chongqing to identify business opportunities. This year marks the 10th anniversary of CEPA. That CEPA is having significant contribution to Hong Kong's economy is beyond doubt. So in my manifesto, I propose that a joint working group be set up to resolve all the problems that are in the way. The working group had its first meeting on the 18th of last month in Guangzhou. 6 central and 7 Guangdong government units were represented. That shows how much importance that the central administration and Guangdong attach to CEPA. We agree that we will implement CEPA initiatives in areas of firms, accountancy, architecture, property management, and healthcare. There will be further development and employment opportunities for Hong Kong in the mainland. I visited New York last week to boost economic and trade cooperation. There were 200 people from the business community, and there were a few dozen coming from Guangdong. The U.S. business community attaches a great deal of importance to Hong Kong. A few thousand people took part in the promotion activities. During the visit, I promoted Hong Kong's role as a superconnector in the Sino-U.S. trade and economic activities. The U.S. State Council principal economist praised Hong Kong's role in the trade activities. She said that Hong Kong provides a conducive platform to facilitate the flow of trade with China and the region. She is of the opinion that Hong Kong's openness, transparency, free market, and rule of law are well-renowned advantages. While we promote economic growth, the Hong Kong SAR government will be just as concerned about the grassroots and the underprivileged. Other than economy and livelihood, the SAR government will have to get on with the constitutional reform. I fully appreciate that the members of the public pin very high hope on the universal suffrage of the Chief Executive in 2017. Views are diverse. There are still gaps to be bridged on fundamental issues. To implement universal suffrage of the Chief Executive in 2017, we need to set aside our differences and forge consensus. In taking forward our constitutional development, we have to scrupulously abide by the basic law provisions and the relevant interpretations and decisions of the NPCSC. And this is the basis, the important basis for achieving consensus and universal suffrage. Since we took office, we have been doing all the preparatory work for consultation and communicating with the community. Before we start the consultation, we need to communicate with various people to listen to what they have to say. The SAR government will work with one heart to forge ahead in terms of politics, economy, and livelihood. We will respond to public aspirations. Even for initiatives that will take time to yield results like housing supply, land supply and housing, we will persevere. We will demonstrate to the people of Hong Kong our commitment to resolving all these social issues. To resolve all these problems, we need the support of the community. We do need the support of the Legislative Council. Ahead of us is the expansion of the landfills. The SAR government is aware. Let me give you the last warning. If you continue shouting in your seat, I will have to order you out of the chamber. Chief Executive. Thank you, President. The SAR government appreciates that the expansion of the landfills represents part of the whole series of initiatives to resolve municipal solid waste. We will get on with collection, delivery, cleansing, hygiene, reduction in source, recycling, and incineration, and we seek to minimize the impact in the community. I must reiterate that the funding proposal for the Tuen Mun landfill will be used for advance and surveying work. I hope that the honourable members will have the common good in mind and support the administration's funding proposal at the Finance Committee meeting tomorrow. With the concerted effort of the government and the LegCo, the government will have introduced 22 bills. All the bills that we meant to introduce, 90% of them have been introduced on schedule. As of now, the Council has enacted 12 bills. It is expected that in this legislative year we will see 14 bills enacted. For this, I'm grateful to the hard work of the councillors. Myself and the SL government will be prepared to work together with the council, and together we will seek to respond to public aspirations with actual achievements. Thank you. The Chief Executive will now answer questions put by members. Dr. Kwok Ka-ki. Mr. Chief Executive, last year you tried to get disposed and you gave a lot of undertaking, housing, environment, education. 1 year on since you took office, the whole of Hong Kong are aware that you got nothing done. Housing, the property prices that have gone up by 15% since you took office, you've got nothing to show for it. You promised reduction in the source. You said that there will be a funding proposal tomorrow. Please do not belabor your point. Your question, please. 15-year education, we see nothing happening. According to the Hong Kong poll, you score 46.2%, 27% supported you, 55% disapproved of your work. Chief Executive, on July 1st, 430,000 people took to the street. You said that they tried so hard. I stood on the street for 6 hours. 430,000 people shouted the loudest, the slogan, "Down with CY Leung." Mr. Chief Executive, if you don't really want to see the members of the public suffer so much, how soon are you going to give the undertaking that you will step down? Are you waiting for order from Beijing? You said that you were a superconductor. People get the feeling that you are a super liar. President, over the past year, I'm grateful to my team for their work and cooperation. I'm grateful to the civil servants for the work and cooperation. I'm grateful to the urgings of the members of the public. I'm grateful to the central government to support my work in line with the basic law. Dr. Kwok Ka-ki mentioned the 3 points to do with the policy. Let me respond here. We are prepared to be monitored by the whole community. On the eve of the anniversary, I published a detailed work report of covering the period of the past year. It has been posted on the web. In the interest of the green cause, we haven't got the hard copy. This is available online. Property prices. As I said at the very beginning, not to mention land production, even for land supply in the urban area, we have to go through all these procedures, which will take a minimum of 1 year. But myself and the governing team have been working very hard. You can see that for the short term, medium term, and long term land supply, it is really something that we got something to show for it. There are many reasons for the rising property prices. One of the factors is being monitored by the administration, and that is the free liquidity and also the long-term low level of interest rate. Now, this is not something that the Hong Kong administration or anybody can control, and this is a global factor. The SL government, in terms of housing, will work hard continuously to respond to the public demands. In terms of landfills and waste reduction, Hong Kong's environmentalists and experts are in agreement that we simply cannot rely solely on waste reduction to handle all the waste without resorting to incineration and landfilling. Waste reduction, recycling, landfilling, incineration are the multi-pronged approach that we will adopt. In terms of reduction of source over the years I've been practicing what I preach, we have zero food waste. On the first day of the administration, we decided to scrap the bottled water. We will not accept any souvenirs. We do not have any corsage. We are minimizing all these non-essential items. Waste reduction is important. Recycling is important, but that cannot be a substitute for the expansion of the landfills.
Regarding free education, in 2013 April, just a few months ago, the SAR government set up a task force that is part of our commitment, and so far we have already met 3 times to review the provision of free kindergarten education. At this stage, I can tell you that we are progressing well. The government attaches significance to kindergarten education as well as 12-year free education. So Dr. Kwok Ka-ki raised 3 policy areas. We've already provided a very comprehensive reply. You're very good. You have spoken for 5 minutes. My first question was, when are you going to step down? Are you waiting for the disposal of the central government? When are you going to step down? The central authorities support my work and the government. With every member of my team, in the past month, they have come out to tell you their thinking. We enjoy very good cooperation. We continue to do our work in the spirit of cooperation. Dr. Kwok, you've already asked a supplementary question. When are you going to step down? A rule is that you can only ask a short follow-up. The CE has already answered your question, so please be seated. Mr. Kwok Wai-keung, thank you. The civil service are important supporters of the administration. They are dedicated and highly efficient, and they won world acclaim. Many civil servants are not happy with the Patron survey report, and they have a challenge whether the administration has deviated from the established mechanism and have not considered the 6 factors. Some unions have decided to withdraw from the mechanism, and they are thinking about a judicial review in order to defend their rights, or they're asking for arbitration. I believe the government will not cut ties with the civil service. How are you going to mend this relationship? And how are you going to restore the morale of the civil service? Thank you, Mr. Kwok, for your question. Myself and the whole government attach a lot of significance to the morale of the civil service, their conditions of service, as well as their conditions of work. And also their workload in the first year of this new government. In my manifesto and policy address and policies announced already have added to the workload substantially of the civil service. In many internal meetings and at open forums, I have wholeheartedly thanked the civil service for their support and cooperation. Well, in my opening remarks, I said that I know that the recent round of pay adjustment has disappointed some civil servants. I think this is understandable, but I like to stress that we have worked according to established mechanism in the pay adjustment exercise. In the process, we have listened duly to the views of the civil servants, the responsible officers of the government, The non-official members of EXCO and some legislators have duly and fully reflected the views of the civil servants in this subject, on this subject. At EXCO meetings, we've given due consideration to the views advanced by civil service associations. Of course, there are 6 factors in the mechanism, and we've considered all of them. So we have stuck to our established mechanism. I understand that some civil service organizations are of the view that there is room for improvement in this pay adjustment mechanism. For this matter, the Secretary for Civil Service has written to the chairman of the Pay Trend Survey Committee, asking him to meet with the staff side and also the official representatives to conduct a review as soon as possible. Let me reiterate, without the support and hard work of the civil service, we would not have been able to implement the measures and also the work we've achieved in the past years. I attach every significance to the view of the civil servants. I hope we can continue to work harmoniously and uphold our spirit of serving the community and do our duty. Thank you. Mr. Kwok, the CE said time and again that he is very grateful to the civil service. I'm sure they've heard his remarks. However, he has not answered the most important part of my question, how is going to mend the relationship with the civil service? Well, as always, I will listen to the views of the civil service. This is always my principle. As mentioned in my manifesto, I will continue to communicate with all ranks of the civil service and their representatives. Mr. Kenneth Leung. Well, in the C question time in May this year, I asked the administration about the implementation of the 36 recommendations of the Review Committee on Avoidance of Conflict of Interest. And there is no timetable for implementing the measures regulating the CE. So I'd like to know when the 36 recommendations by the independent committee can be fully implemented, and how or when are we going to amend the Prevention of Bribery Ordinance on the part regulating the CE. Well, myself, the government, attach a lot of significance to the avoidance of conflict of interest involving the CE and also civil servants, the possible conflict of interest while carrying out their duties. And therefore, on the day when the report of the independent committee was announced, I took the initiative to say that I fully accept the report and will consider how the recommendations could be implemented. So far, the administration has already implemented about 1/2 of the recommendations. We have already amended the code of conduct for accountable officers, and that's an administrative arrangement. We set a lot of store by that, and I take the initiative to carry out the measures proactively. Mr. Kenneth Leung, can the CE give us a concrete timetable, in particular amendments to PROBO? Is there any timetable? Regulation of the conduct of the CE, this is very important. This is about legislative amendment to implement the committee's recommendation that the CE should, sections 3 and 4 of POBO should bind the CE as well. Legislative amendments are needed, and therefore I must give a thorough and in-depth consideration of the whole matter. In terms of the operational aspects, I have to ensure that this recommendation by the committee can be implemented in spirit, not just in letter. So we have to have a thorough consideration. Mr. Tam Yu Chong. The residents in Tuen Mun have always felt that the government has placed many offensive facilities, obnoxious facilities in Tuen Mun, and yet precious little has been done for the development of Tuen Mun as a community. For instance, increasing investment, developing large-scale projects so that residents can work in their own district. They don't have to travel a long way to work in other districts. There is room for improvement in this regard. And DAB has given the government a proposal for areas 44 and 46, Tuen Mun, a new economic development area, should be built. This proposal was put to the Secretary for Development. So far, we have not seen any decision or concrete action. And yet, there is the proposal to further expand the Tuen Mun landfill to 200 hectares, and residents there are highly unhappy about this. So the CE mentioned they will ensure that transportation would be done properly to minimize the impact on residents. Should the government go a step further, for instance, there should be special care for Tuen Mun residents to alleviate their burden. For instance, some relief measures, can they be waived to pay from MSW charging, and also waiver in rates, etc. Mr. Xi, all members know that I attach a lot of significance to the views of the community. So during the election period and after election, I have contacted with them face to face to understand their aspirations. Well, before and after the election, I've been to Tuen Mun to meet residents and opinion leaders there. We held forums with them. If the community is doing well, then the whole of Hong Kong will be good as well. So we must take care of development in all 18 districts. For Tuen Mun, we cannot go on with our old thinking when Tuen Mun was first planned and developed many, many years ago. Indeed, we had plans to place facilities obnoxious to residents there. In this regard, we really owe the residents of Tuen Mun, and we must review the current approach. We should think of ways in advanced cities in terms of planning, implementation, and management of such facilities. They have very smart ways to turn polluting facilities to non-polluting or non-obnoxious facilities. For instance, I visited cities in Europe. They have incinerators placed in the urban areas, but the outlook design, the management, and even the color scheme would not cause people to think that it is a traditional incinerator polluting the environment. In this regard, I really want to discuss with residents of Tuen Mun so that we can come up with a solution. Mr. Tam, in his remarks, talked about local community economy. This is important. Anti-North, in particular, with the development of economy in the PRD, the gravity of economic development has shifted to the northern part of China, and therefore we should do more to develop that local economy, local community economy, to provide more job opportunities and to provide more business opportunities for the SMEs. Mr. Tam, I think the CE has put it very well, but this is not enough. How we implement these ideas is also important so as to give us confidence. The government really says a lot of store by this. Therefore, the CS4A is going to visit the Tuen Mun District Council today to listen to the views of councillors directly. And after today's meeting, we will implement their aspirations as far as possible.
Assembly Lau. Well, the chief executive uttered so much nonsense, and Mr. Tam Yu-jong said he made a good point. I think that I have to tell this to the DAB. Mr. President, the chief executive has been in office for 1 year. He's delivered virtually nothing. On July 1st, hundreds of thousands of people took to the street to demand your departure and universal suffrage. You have published this work report, and nothing measures up, and he said he would not be complacent. Some teachers told me that he's setting a bad example. If they present a report card, they're scoring all these fat big zeros, and the kids will say, I will not be complacent. He said that for 2017 universal suffrage for the chief executive, people are pinning very high hope. But he's asking the community to set aside differences to achieve consensus. And he said that for the past year, he has done a lot of preparatory work. On behalf of the 7 million people in Hong Kong, how soon are you going to start the consultation? Please do not stall the matter. Chief executive. To say that for the past year, the SL government delivered virtually nothing is really not fair to the ruling team and the civil servants. In terms of constitutional reform, I think Mr. Emily Lau is referring to the universal suffrage for the chief executive in 2017 and the consultation thereof. If we can get on with the poverty alleviation a year sooner, I'm not sure whether this is good enough for Ms. Emily Lau. We got the endorsement of the council to implement the OALA, so that 340,000 senior citizens, close to 400,000, who will be able to get an additional $1,100 to get a $2,200. I'm not sure whether you would call this an achievement. If we can get this done a year sooner, the senior citizens would benefit a year sooner. If we consult a year sooner regarding 2017, we still have the election in 2017, not 2016. So it's all about the priority. We do have the priority in mind. And regarding the universal suffrage for the chief executive, in 2017, in accordance with the Basic Law and the NPCSC decision, we do have the commitment, myself and SL government, we get on with the work, we have sufficient time to get on with full consultation and the legislative work. Ms. Emily Lau, President, if the OALA is so popular, there wouldn't have been so much hassle here, there wouldn't have been so many amendments made here. In his work report, in connection with the achievements, you try to call your own achievements a work undertaken by the Donald Tsang administration. You are taking on board all these work as your achievements. Now, regarding the consultation, someone from your team, Mr. W.K. Lam, said that if you do not get on with the consultation, people get the impression that you're stalling on the matter. If you do not reform the constitutional setup, Hong Kong will be doomed. Are you going to really see Hong Kong doomed like this? Chief Executive, where the convener of the Executive Council is merely talking about the difference between getting on with the constitutional reform and not getting on with the constitutional reform. Ms. Emily Lau is saying that we can set aside other things and implement the consultation. If we consult a year sooner, we still elect the chief executive in 2017. Ms. Emily Lau mentioned the OALA. There were so many hassles here in the council. I understand that some members felt that the threshold should be lowered, so the more senior citizens would stand to benefit, or the senior citizens would be able to get more in terms of benefits. If the SL government doesn't bring this up, the 340,000 or close to 400,000 senior citizens would see the benefits later. In collecting the benefits. In terms of the transport concession fare, it is true that it was brought up by the previous administration, but if you look at it clearly through our efforts, through the hard work of Ms. Matthew Cheung. On a Sunday morning, I went down to Sau Kei Wan to see the situation. We advanced the implementation by a couple of months. The senior citizens welcomed that. It was the policy of the previous administration, but through the efforts of this administration, we advanced the implementation by a couple of months for the senior citizens. we do have the priority. We have to do things in a systematic manner. We do have to prioritize. Mr. Christopher Chung. Mr. Chief Executive, recently there are a dozen or so district councils, and they're opposed to the Occupy Central movement. They are concerned that if the heart of Hong Kong is occupied, then it would bring the business in Hong Kong to a standstill, and that would also jeopardize Hong Kong's development. So what sort of economic risk or political risk assessments have been conducted by the administration in terms of the International Financial Center and also the day-to-day activities? How much impact would that be? Has the administration persuaded the movement organizers to achieve their demand through more peaceful manners? Thank you very much, Mr. Chung, for the question. As I said in my introductory remarks, in overseas jurisdictions, they are experiencing economic downturn. Jobless rate hit 20–30%. 1 in 4 to 5 is out of a job. In Hong Kong, we have a stable economic situation. This stable economic situation cannot be taken for granted. It is through our efforts to achieve and preserve. So therefore, I urge the people of Hong Kong that we have to do our level best to develop our economy. We have to do our level best to maintain the economic stability. In terms of the Occupy Central movement and its impact on the economy, the business representatives, a lot of business organizations, a lot of business community leaders have already spoken up on this. I agree with them. I agree that their views are impartial. Therefore, the SAR government is of the view that every single one of us has to preserve and develop our economy. As regards those taking part in the deliberation of the Occupy Central movement and their aspirations for constitutional reforms, as I said at the very beginning, the SAR government, in particular the CMAB, will, as always, listen to all these aspirations and foster communication between various parties. Mr. Christopher Chung. President, has the administration assessed whether the police force would be able to handle all the confrontations arising from the Occupy Central movement? Will there be any consideration to invite the garrison to help keep peace in Hong Kong? Order, please. Chief Executive. President, I do have full faith in the professionalism of the Hong Kong police force and their ability to discharge their duty in accordance with the law of Hong Kong. If there are uproars like this, I'll have to order you out of the chamber. This is the last warning, Chief Executive. Let me repeat, I have full faith in the Hong Kong police force discharging the duties and enforcing the law in a professional manner in accordance with the law. Mr. Chen Kin-po. Thank you, President. Chief Executive. The council is becoming more like district council. Now, this is a lawmaking body. We should be representing overall interests. All decisions should be predicated on the overall interest in Hong Kong. But there are some recent examples that show that when it comes to issues concerning district interests, when there are conflicts between local interest and the territory-wide interest, there are some political parties that are concerned about their local support, and they would put the local interests ahead of the overall interests. Appreciate the difficulties, and I do understand the the votes mean a great deal to them, but this doesn't augur well for Hong Kong. So in relation to this situation where LegCo is becoming more like district councils, how can you make sure that the overall interest will be taken care of, and how will you balance this against the local interests? Chief Executive. But President, I understand that some members elected from the districts, the LegCo is a territory-wide lawmaking body. Members are also elected from the districts. So they are concerned about the overall interest of Hong Kong, while at the same time they will have to be concerned about the interests of the local constituencies. And this is something understandable. For those members elected from the districts, how will they balance their responsibilities for the whole of Hong Kong and for the local interests? I think that they will be able to strike the balance themselves. As Chief Executive myself, it's not for me to offer any comments. But as far as the political landscape in Hong Kong is concerned, we must bear in mind that other than getting on with the 2016-2017 constitutional reforms, the rest of the elements, like all public officers, LegCo members, district councillors, how do they view their respective duties? I mean, this is something that we have to look at. Going forward, certain political bodies that are developing into political parties, I think other than having regard to local views, they also have to have the overall interest in Hong Kong in mind. Mr. Chen Kin-pong, Mr. Chief Executive, you asked them to consider the overall interest in Hong Kong, then we're asking for the impossible. I think the best course of action is to offer some incentives for them. In Korea, now they are very patriotic. All Koreans are very patriotic, but they do offer a lot of incentives. Now, for areas where they have incinerators, they have certain incentives offered to them. So, Mr. Chief Executive, are you going to consider for districts where they're experiencing difficulties, will you be offering them more incentives, Chief Executive? Well, that can be considered. Obviously, we have to consult the views of the local people. We also have to consider the principle of value for money. Well, we meet the needs of the local people. We cannot really waste the taxpayers' money. Mr. Raymond Chan. Thank you, President. Mr. President, this morning, all these questions posed by honourable members, none of them could be answered by C.Y. Leung. Let me put a simple question, C.Y. Leung. Have you eaten, C.Y. Leung? I haven't. Since July 1st rally, from 10 p.m., I haven't eaten a thing. I have been staging a hunger strike for 10 days. Not only me, a lot of the members of the public don't really have a good life since you've taken office. Over the past 10 days, I was asked whether the SAR government did come and comfort me. In the eyes of the SAR government, the 400,000 people taking to the street are merely throwing a tantrum. We are really doing something childish. Now, there are so many issues ahead of us that have to be grappled with. I think the fundamental solution is to start at source, like waste, for instance. We simply cannot ram anything down people's throat by expanding blindly the landfills. We have to start with reduction at source. By the same token, this rubbish government has to start reduction at source. We have to get rid of this useless chief executive. That C.Y. Leung said that he wants to set aside differences to forge consensus. My question is, C.Y. Leung How are you going to start reduction of source in the administration and step down to take responsibility?
Chief Executive, thank you, Mr. Chen, for your question. The government has never said that people going on the rallies were throwing a temper tantrum, were doing something childish. Let me reiterate this. Seriously, we've never said that these people were throwing a temper tantrum or doing something childish. In fact, the whole SAR faces some very long-standing and difficult issues. With many long-standing issues, we have to reduce waste at source. The awareness among the community is not high. We are inferior to South Korea and Singapore, and this is because we have not done a good job in this regard for a long time. The government has to work even harder. Mr. Raymond Chen said that we are now blindly expanding our landfills. Tomorrow, the government will come to the Finance Committee of LegCo to ask for funding. We are asking money to do something that is not blind at all. We need the money for consultancy and surveying. We need 2 years to study how we can do it well, so that the expansion will not affect the lives of Two Moon residents and their neighborhood districts. If we are doing it blindly, tomorrow we will not be here for money for investigation and surveying, but to ask the money for direct expansion. So the government attaches significance to the views of districts and the whole territory. We are not just working for this term. We are trying to provide solutions to problems that would bother Hong Kong in the coming 20, 30 years. Mr. Raymond Chen, Mr. Siwai Leung has not answered my question. I am asking, how will he promise to cut waste in the government by stepping down? If he thinks that he is not the source of waste in the government, whether it be Mr. Henry Tang or Siwai Leung, it's just the same. The government is still useless. So the culprit is in fact small circle elections or the Chinese Communist Party, which is the cause of the problem. Mr. CE, I and my team will continue to carry out my promises in the manifesto and policy address. We are confident that just like the last year, with the support of LegCo and the community, we can gradually achieve results and achievements. Mrs. Regina Ip. Mr. Raymond Chen. Mr. Raymond Chen. These 3 legislators, Mr. Raymond Wong, Mr. Raymond Chen, Mr. Albert Chan, have to leave the chamber at once. Leave the chamber at once. Leave the chamber at once. Mr. Leung Kwok-hong, leave the chamber at once. Leave the chamber at once.
行政長官繼續回。
The CEO will continue to take questions from members. Mrs. Regina Yip. Thank you, President. Mr. CE. Many reports on competitiveness have pointed out that our competitiveness is slipping. In particular, the Institute on Competitiveness of China cities are saying that we have dropped substantially in terms of our competitiveness among Chinese cities because our industry structure is very lopsided. We have no real industries, and innovation in science and technology has been stagnant. All right. In addition to communication with mainland cities, providing housing and visiting New York to strengthen our role as an intermediary. Well, I'd like to know what plans the CE has to enhance our long-term competitiveness. A city's competitiveness, including Hong Kong, a place like Hong Kong, is a consolidation of many factors. Mrs. Regina Yip has mentioned a number of factors related to competitiveness. Thanks to the Compact, or rather the Economic Development Commission, where we have experts, academics, and also business leaders. They've given us very valuable views and insights into this matter. I think we have to work well in two areas. First, our manpower resources. Because of our aging population, starting from 2018, our overall productivity, that is, the size of our workforce will shrink, and this will undermine our competitiveness. Another area is land and housing. According to a survey, we are 4,000 places short in our international schools. It's not that we don't have school organizing bodies, no money, or no parents, no students. We lack land. So another limiting factor of competitiveness is land and housing supply. And our culture, our leisure facilities, are also important components of a city's competitiveness. We will continue to take a multi-pronged approach to enhance the city's competitiveness. Of course, there are issues that we have to pay attention to and to address. But we should not slight ourselves. In my recent visit to New York, for example, I met with members of the business and financial sector and also the government. They were unanimous in giving praise to Hong Kong's competitiveness. So I hope that you can work with the government so that we can scale new heights together. Mrs. Regina Yip. I thank Mr. Xi for sharing the reasons for our slippage in competitiveness. Can the Chief Executive tell us, as far as the Economic Development Commission and the Financial Services Development Commission is concerned, what recommendations do they have to strengthen our pillar industries, to develop new industries, and how we can enhance our competitiveness? The EDC has got various task forces, and these task forces have given us variable suggestions together with the conveners of the task force and also the Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development at FS. We gave a few examples when we met the press. Take shipping as an example. In the 12th five-year plan, there is this remark. The country supports Hong Kong to enhance and strengthen its position as a world financial and maritime center. There is a lot of room to maneuver, and transportation covers sea and air, And maritime doesn't mean offices. There is also the financing and lease of vessels, and also the supporting legal services. All these are things we can do. We must act in the market appropriately. And after these meetings, we have plans to further these measures and implement them. Dr. Fernando Cheung. Mr. Xi, in your opening remarks, you say that the junior secondary students here will see their home in NT North in the future. But what about the farmers and villagers in NT Northeast? They are already living there, and the homes will be removed by you. These villages are next to the new development areas. There is 170 hectares golf course there for tycoons and the rich. They have over 2,000 members. 170 hectares is equivalent to the size of 15.6 Choi Hong Estate. They can stay there for 20 years at an annual rent of $1,000. They can enjoy golf there, and yet villagers living next to this golf course, they have lived there for a few generations. They live and also farm there. They have to be vacated from their homes. And the CE's villa is just next to it. The CE's lodge is just next to it. Mr. C, when you entertain your friends who are members of the golf course and are property developers when they're enjoying champagne and barbecue at your lodge, just next to your lodge, villagers have to be vacated from their homes. What are your feelings? Can you really continue to swallow champagne and enjoy good food? Mr. C, I respect the questions of legislators, but I have to set the facts straight. I have never entertained developers or business leaders in my lodge. What are my activities? I've invited secondary school children from Yuen Long together with the FS, the CS4A, and also SJ. We sat on the lawn and discussed with them their views of their future, how do they see their schools, and also their learning. I invited the CPU advisors to come to my lodge. And then in the summer vacation, there will be organizations to provide internship for Form 5 students from Yuen Long. I invited their representatives to meet me at lodge. I've never invited property developers to my lodge, and I've never treated them with champagne there, never. The future use of the lodge, Fanning Lodge, will be decided by the Town Planning Board, not by myself. If the whole NT North, that is, if the new towns of NT Northeast, if the planning has to include Fanning Lodge, I'm more than willing to, or to be more accurate. Actually, Fanning Lodge doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the government. I'm willing to put it to the government that Fanning Lodge should be incorporated into the new development areas of NT Northeast. Regarding the issue of the golf course, I have to set the record straight. In the past year, since my assumed office, one of the busiest bureau of the government is the Development Bureau, and the other one to be followed by the Transport and Housing Bureau, and also the planning the departments, the works departments, the housing departments are the busiest. Why are they so busy? Because they're trying to identify sites for housing for medium and long-term and short-term use, and to meet the needs of social economic development. The 170-hectare golf course, well, it is impossible that it has already escaped our scrutiny. But You have to know that the new town developments in NT Northeast is much, much bigger than the golf course. So we could not polarize the two things. We should not create confrontation by putting one against the other. We cannot say that because we still have a golf course in Fanning, there is no need to develop NT Northeast. And because of that, villages affected by NT Northeast can be allowed to stay there without any removal or reprovisioning. Anyone who cares for the problem should understand that the new town development plan of NT Northeast was first proposed 25 years ago in 1998, 25 years ago. Because of social and economic reasons, the issue was shelved, and then in 2008 it was rejuvenated. A lot of advanced works has been done to develop a new town and to incorporate a 170-hectare golf course into a new town development plan. We cannot do it overnight. We cannot give the green light and then auction the land tomorrow. We have a lot of preparatory work to be done. Legislators should know we need to do impact assessments on traffic and environment and a lot of procedures to go through.
So we do attach a lot of importance to this piece of land, and that will become part of the resources. And we do attach a lot of importance to the piece of land for planning purposes. The piece of land is governed by a lease which will expire in 2020. Within the lease, there is a clause that the government can give a 12 months notice for the site to be recovered. But we cannot resume the site for the sake of resumption. If we resume the land and having got all these planning started, are we going to leave the site lying around there? So we do have the procedures to go through. Where necessary, the SL government will utilize every single piece of land in a proper way. Our purpose is to serve the people of Hong Kong. Dr. Fernando Cheung. However hard the Chief Executive tried to explain and how you use the Fanning Lodge, whether you have entertained the property tycoons or the golf players, the fact remains that the Fanning Lodge and the 170-hectare golf course are preserved. And this is the place where the tycoons are using for entertainment. And it is the homes of the villages that are going to be demolished. Now, you said that it would take time for planning to be done. Please, your question. You said a moment ago that you are prepared to give up the Fanning Lodge. And the golf course can be recovered within one single year. Why don't you get started with it straight away and make use of these important pieces of land to allow the villagers to have a decent life without having to wait for another 20 years? Chief Executive, well, if you incorporate these 170 hectares of land and the Fanning Lodge into the NENT development plan, we have to make sure that the plan will be a complete plan. It's no good to have the new town created without any jobs or without any transport infrastructure, without any drainage facilities, and so on. Over the past year, we have been trying to identify land. We encounter a lot of problems of this nature, so we are committed. We don't have any intention of evading any obstacles. In dealing with the property issues, Mr. Fernando Cheung must be well aware that we will not look after the interests of any particular party. Coming up soon will be a bill which will have to do with the interests of the property sector, and we are facing this squarely. Mr. Chung Kwok Pan, Chief Executive, you mentioned the competitive edge, you mentioned the labor force and land. The increase in the labor force and land will not necessarily increase the competitiveness. Recently, the SL government has introduced a lot of measures that are detrimental to the free economy. If I may put this to the Chief Executive, how will you make sure that the U.S. Heritage Foundation for the past 19 years has rated Hong Kong as one of the freest economies in the world? Now, how will you preserve this image, this status in Hong Kong? It will not disappear in your term, Chief Executive. President, I do attach a lot of importance to the freedom of our economy in Hong Kong. We are rated pretty highly, and I'm concerned about the actual operation of the economy. We maintain the freedom of our economy. We have to bear in mind the livelihood of the public and also the business sector. Where necessary, measures have to be introduced, like the baby formula limitation, the Hong Kong property for Hong Kong people, and the measures to stabilize the property market. All these stamp duty measures that we have seen a rise in the property prices, and faced with all these issues, we do need to introduce measures, sometimes legislative measures, to cater for the interests of various sectors in the community. Mr. Chung Kok Pan. President, thank you. My question is, a lot of the administrative measures are introduced in due haste without thorough consideration. For these measures without thorough considerations, they're not helping Hong Kong at all. If anything, they are really detrimental to the free economy in Hong Kong. Chief Executive. Now, take the measures that I mentioned, for instance. There are a lot of jurisdictions that promote free economies. They do have similar measures. They do impose a stamp duty on foreign buyers of properties. They do have measures to limit the export of baby formula. In other advanced jurisdictions, in exceptional circumstances, would resort to these measures. Mr. Gary Fan. Thank you, President. Mr. Chief Executive, I've been listening. I've been hanging on every single word that you uttered today. In answer to the questions, you said some of the measures are supreme. I mean, if you're implementing proper measures, you wouldn't have been indisposed. On the first day you took office, there were hundreds of thousands of people taking to the street. If you put a livelihood first and politics second, then we wouldn't have seen 430,000 people taking to the street on July 1st. Now, my question is, the government is blindly pursuing land. The NENT development is an example of the government grabbing land blindly. The government is bamboozling the people of Hong Kong. The land planning is the problem doesn't arise from land shortage. The government has thousands of hectares of land that are lying idle without being used. Now, you talked about priority, Chief Executive, but you're not giving priority to this idle land. We have 150,000 housing units that are lying around vacant. Now, you are putting the interests of the Northeast people against the rest of Hong Kong. I think it is you who are polarizing Hong Kong. It's not the NT people who are polarizing Hong Kong. Chief Executive, why don't you withdraw the NENT development project? How soon are you going to give priority to the vacant land in Hong Kong, and how soon are you going to recover the golf course? Chief Executive. I've answered the question about the golf course a moment ago. Mr. Gary Fan mentioned that there are thousands of land lying vacant in Hong Kong. Mr. Fan, I think effectively you are saying that this kind of land can be developed to replace the NENT development project. Now, this vacant land, thousands of hectares, there have been a lot of discussions in the community. The Secretary for Development and his colleagues have also addressed this question. We don't have thousands of hectares of land lying vacant. We cannot use this kind of land to replace the NENT development or the new town developments in the future. So we have to be pragmatic. Then you say that we have 150,000 units that are lying vacant. I really want to know where you get the figures from and where they are in Hong Kong. The vacancy rate in the private sector and also in the public sector remains low. Mr. Gary Fan, President, I don't think I go along with the Chief Executive. Your administration is creating tragedies on earth. Now, on the one hand, you said that you need a lot of land for housing production, and there are villages who see their homes are being destroyed in your NENT development project. So I'd like to urge the administration to take advantage of the vacant land and withdraw this NENT development project. We have to give priority to the local people. I will be stepping out, Mr. President, in protest against the Chief Executive who is resorting to sophistry and double talk in answer to members' questions. Chief Executive. President, I think we have to be pragmatic. Obviously, we are very concerned about those who are affected in the development of a new town. We are concerned about their livelihood, but we have to bear in mind that we have the Sha Tin new town today. The Tseung Kwan O new town, Tsuen Wan new town. In the course of development, the residents originally living there had to move. We'll try to avoid it, but sometimes it is unavoidable. Since it is unavoidable, we are prepared to discuss with the residents and representatives to see if we can identify a fair, lawful, and sensible and reasonable measure to compensate them. Mr. Lam Tai Fai, President, I don't mind telling members that every time I see CY, the Chief Executive, I get all kinds of feelings welling up in me. Honestly, today I don't have this kind of feeling. I feel very calm and collected. I feel at ease. I believe that my wisdom is growing as the year goes on. Your question, please. Well, President, you are one of the persons I hold in high esteem. I won't be complacent myself. In fact, I shouldn't be complacent. Mr. Chief Executive, each year you have the work report. I would produce a work report every 3 months. I'm trying to be pragmatic. I work harder than you. You have to work harder than me, Chief Executive. I hope that one day, when I see you here in this council, I will be able to say, I support you, CY. President, today I'm not going to ask a question about his credibility, the UPWs, or the governance ability. We do have the answer in mind. You do, and I do. My question is very simple. I'd like to put this to the Chief Executive. Now, in terms of the accountability system, the spirit and the mechanism, what criteria do you have to evaluate this system, and how, like the popularity rating of the ruling team has been plunging to -20, -30, they're in the negative territory. Should these principal officials be held responsible politically? If so, how? If not, why not? How low does the popularity have to be dropping to it before they should be held accountable. So will you tell us the spirit of the whole accountability system? Because that would make a difference to the entire competitive edge in Hong Kong going forward.
Chief Executive, not just Mr. Lam Tai Fai cares about the work, the capability and performance of the officials of the government. As the Chief Executive, I even care more about their capability and performance. I'm also concerned about the relative difficulties and problems they have in their respective areas. I think I also have to take care of their well-being. So for all public officers, whether we talk about legislators, civil servants, and accountable officers, we should be fair in evaluating their performance. My team is dedicated and conscientious. They have different degree of difficulties in their portfolio, but we're all willing to ride over the difficulties and serve the community. The whole team and also the civil service they lead enjoy very good morale. They are working very hard to serve the community. Mr. Lam Tai Fai, although I am very at ease, the reply by the CEO would really make me agitated. Well, President, I said that you are a very wise person. You should judge whether the CEO has answered my question. Your reply would cause the public to misunderstand you, that you no longer defend or want to uphold the accountability system. I give you a very simple example. If the popularity rating of accountable officers have dropped to -20, -30, -50, how can you really uphold the spirit of accountability? Of course, all civil servants, all legislators would do their duty. I'm asking you about the accountable officers. President, you must assist me. You are a very intelligent person. You must put a question to the Chief Executive. Well, opinion polls will give us the degree of support and popularity rating. Well, different institutes have different surveys. They can be done by different institutions, and whether the results are made public or not, well, they can serve as good reference. Should there be great fluctuations within a very short period of time, we have to understand why, because it serves as one of the reference for us to consider. But that is not the way for us, not the only parameter for measuring the performance of accountable officers. Mr. Lam, you cannot ask a follow-up anymore. Dr. Joseph Lee, Chief Executive. In your last policy address, you said that to promote a wide discussion in the community, to forge consensus and follow that 5-step process to work out the details for universal suffrage for 2017 CE election, and also to pave the way for universal suffrage for electrical elections in 2018. Well, you blew your own trumpet. You said that you had done a lot in your work report, but in this area, you have done little at all or nothing at all. You said that, well, even if you delay the consultation for 1 year, it doesn't mean that you cannot resolve the problem by 2017. But I'd like to know, in the remaining half of this year, how are you going to honor this undertaking in your policy address? The community are saying that the 2017 election should allow everyone to exercise their right to nominate, to stand in election, and to vote in the CE election. Chief Executive, myself and colleagues responsible for constitutional reform have said a number of times that we are committed to implementing the CE election in 2017 and relevant constitution reforms. When we start work, we are confident that we can achieve the goals together with the community. We must have consensus. There must be a 2/3 majority support in this council to the proposals, and therefore we need time. The C election will be held in 2017. We have enough time to do that. We will give everyone, including the council, sufficient time to discuss the relevant issues. And before we formally start the consultation, we'll continue to listen to views from different sectors. In the past, as you know, colleagues from the CMAB has been doing this all along. Dr. Joseph Lee, you be the judge, President. The Chief Executive has not answered my very specific question. In the coming 6 months or the remaining half of this year, how is he going to address the aspirations by the community, how universal suffrage can be implemented in 2017? I think you've also already heard our work plan for the coming 6 months. We are not just talk about the CMAB, other bureaus and accountable officers are planning their work in the coming year. And one of which is to prepare for the main thrusts of the policy address next year, and also our proposals in the budget to ensure that our expenditure part in the budget can closely follow the policy address proposals. So once we have a decision on the issue of constitutional reform, we'll inform the Council as soon as possible. Mr. Tony C. Thank you, President. The Chief Executive has said a number of times that one of the government's priorities is to promote economic development, and is also the government's paramount priority to provide housing. So there's been 2 rounds of demand management measures to curb short-term property speculation. However, these drastic measures have affected the normal transactions in the property sector. People have criticized the government. Perhaps it has already forsaken its free market principles. And this appropriate action by the government might become excessive interference. I'd like to hear the CE's response to such remarks. Before and after the CE assumed office, I'd like to know whether there is any change in his housing policy, because the number of subdivided flats actually far exceed the original expectation or estimate. My philosophy in housing has never changed. Housing is among the most important issues in governance. All along, the interest rate has been low, and there is also over liquidity all over the world. And in the first few months after I assumed office, property prices continued to rise. Although we have shown the public that the new government is very determined to work at the fundamentals, we will provide more land for housing. However, this cannot be done overnight. Even if we have land available overnight, it would take 3 to 4 years before they can be turned to flats. So we have to increase supply. But before the supply is here, we have to do something referred to by Mr. Tony Zhe as demand management measures. No government likes that, although it should be done by many governments, whether it be the mainland authorities, Singapore, or governments in the US and Europe. They very much want to do the same. There was a report published a few days ago on similar measures taken by governments other than Hong Kong. We will continue to pay attention to this issue. Demand-side management measures, as explained by the FS, is not just to steady property prices, not just to ensure that property prices will rise beyond the reach of Hong Kong people. We also have to consider the overall impact on our economy. A bubble in the property sector would undermine our economy. It is detrimental to our whole community and economy. So we have to manage the demand. As for subdivided flats, my colleagues know very well that I am very, very concerned about the situation of people living in subdivided flats. I care a lot about their living conditions and related issues. We have commissioned a consultancy. We more or less know the status quo and also the number of such flats. Those with safety issues will be subject to enforcement action by relevant departments. We have to resolve the issue of subdivided flats, and the crux of the matter still lies with supply. So I'd like to appeal to everyone, to legislators, to district councillors, and also members of the community. We really do not have thousands of hectares of land lying idle. Very often we have only got a few thousand square feet of land, and we have to change the land use and seek the approval of the Town Planning Board. I ask for your forbearance and accommodation. We must ensure enough supply before we can address the issue of subdivided flats and demand-side management. If we have sufficient supply, I'll be the first to support abolition of demand-side management measures. Mr. Tong Li. As we can all see, there isn't any drop in property prices recently, and these measures cannot satisfy the demand for housing. Will the Chief Executive launch more drastic measures to manage demand for housing? Chief Executive, Hong Kong is a very small economy and also a very open one. Open in the sense that people and funds can move in and out of Hong Kong very freely. It's not just for the past year. Decades of experience tells us that our investment market, including the property sector, can change very drastically within a very short period of time. So we will keep a very close eye on changes in the property market. Well, before we launched the measures, we have considered the situation in the property sector. There is shortage of supply, and there is also very low interest rate and also liquidity easing. So this is something beyond our control. So we must keep a very close eye on the local situation and the global development. Mr. KK Fong, Chief Executive, I don't know whether you're aware that on the rally on the 1st of July, 430,000 people took to the streets. The speaker's off mic. Can you please turn on the microphone for me? Yes. Can I begin again? Please do. Chairman, Mr. Chief Executive, I don't know whether you watched live broadcasts of the rally on the 1st of July. 430,000 protesters braved the storm and the rain to come out to ask for genuine universal suffrage. When the heavy rain came, 430,000 people opened their umbrellas, and when the rain stopped, they closed their umbrella. At the same time, 430,000 people, they braved the rain and storm. They danced with the rain and storm. They are for genuine universal suffrage. Can you please allow me to finish first? Please come to your question. 430,000 members of the public, they are not really organized, but they are so united. It is the wish of the people to have genuine universal suffrage, and the whole process is peaceful, orderly, and rational. Yet, 430,000 protesters have breached the government's regulations and rules, fighting for universal suffrage. They were willing to do that for genuine universal suffrage. I don't know whether the CE heard the most chanted slogan by the protesters: "Step down, CE, down with CY Leung."
Your question, please. President, I tried to describe what happened to him. And there were some commentators who said that in Hong Kong we have the first-rate citizens, but ninth-rate chief executive. And there is such a mismatch in the governance. Now, Mr. Chief Executive, if you understand the situation on that day, will you be launching proposals for true universal suffrage? Are you going to step down as well, Chief Executive? On the second question, myself and my team will be working hard continuously. We will be seeking to act in straight accordance with the Basic Law and the decisions of the NPCSC, and implement universal suffrage for the Chief Executive in 2017. Now, this Basic Law, which you have with you all the time, when the Basic Law was still a consultation document in 1988, and when it was still a draft in 1989, that was about 20 years ago, when Mr. KK Fung and myself took part in the process, we do have the common expectation, common aspiration that after Hong Kong's reunification with the mainland, we will be able to achieve universal suffrage for the Chief Executive in accordance with the Basic Law. Mr. President, this is something that Mr. KK Fung and myself spent an awful lot of energy taking part in the drafting work of the Basic Law process. During my term of office, I have aspirations to get this achieved. My aspirations are no less than anybody else. So together with Mr. KK Fung and the rest of the people of Hong Kong, we get this achieved. Mr. KK Fung, President, 430,000 people took to the street in a peaceful, orderly, and sensible manner. Mr. Fung, please do not belabor the point. If I may pursue this question, they do have the common aspiration for universal suffrage. Now, for these orderly, peaceful, and sensible people who breached the law, will you find this acceptable? Chief Executive, President, Mr. KK Fung said that breaching the Hong Kong law, I'm not sure under what circumstances did the breach occur. Well, they applied for 50,000 people, but they ended up with far too many. Whether the question of legality and so on is not something for me as Chief Executive in answer to members' questions at this electoral session to decide. If Mr. KK Fung is of the view that someone has breached the law, he should lodge a report. Well, that brings us to the end of the Q&A session for the Chief Executive. Will members please remain standing while the Chief Executive leaves the chamber. I now adjourn the Council.